everyone. Welcome to the program. This is Sunday Politics, live on Channels Television. I'm Joaquim Aloye in Abuja. Let's tell you that the Vice President Kashim Shettima has returned to Abuja, Nigeria, after representing President Bola Tinubu at the just concluded 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. During the session in New York, the VP called on world leaders to recommit themselves to the reform of the United Nations Security Council. He also canvassed a permanent seat for Nigeria and other African countries, stressing that it has since become imperative for the United Nations to strengthen its relevance and credibility in a rapidly changing world. Take a listen to some of what the VP said in New York.
Today, these pillars of our organization are threatened. They risk being broken by the relentless pursuit of individual national priorities rather than the collective needs of the nations that are assembled here today. While commitment to multilateralism offers us the surest guarantee of global action to address the existential challenges we face, singularity and nationalism are undermining the aspirations towards the peaceful and collective resolution of such challenges. The continued manifestations of these challenges testifies to our failings rather than to any lofty achievements on our part. Billions of dollars are being committed to the prosecution of wars and the planning of the embers of conflict. Yet, we always recoil from bringing out the resources we need to build peace and to deliver life's necessities to people.
All right, you heard the Vice President Kashim Shettima speaking on behalf of the nation, Nigeria, at the United Nations General Assembly. But beyond that speech, the VP got a briefing from the president because he was representing the president in Nigeria. So he led the delegation, and there's so many activities on the sideline, on the front line, and every aspect of that meeting at the 79th General Assembly of the United Nations. But what are the benefits? Because that is what concerns us. Everything that anyone that has been there on the bill of Nigeria, paid for by Nigeria, has gone there for the benefit of Nigeria, isn't it? That's what we're made to believe. But how much of these benefits should we be expecting as a people? You see, officials, the ministers, members of cabinet, top government officials who are present there. Some governors are also there. But this is also to help Nigeria move forward on the global stage. Let's speak with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who joins us virtually live. Ambassador Yusuf Maitama Tuga is live for us. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister, and it's a pleasure having you on the program tonight.
Thank you for having me, Sean.
I know that in this kind of meetings, you really go, not with bowl in your hands or cup in hand, as though we are begging, but we always, every nation, go with an agenda to the United Nations General Assembly, and the body, United Nations, has its agenda, and the United Nations General Assembly has its purpose, which is meant to achieve every year. But this year, what would you say is the central purpose of Nigeria to UNGA, and did we achieve it?
Well, just as President Tinubu initiated last year, one of the major goals was the reform of the global governance structures. And I'm happy to inform that several countries have joined the bandwagon. This is something that President Bola Tinubu spoke to last year, and it became a recurring theme this year. In fact, it got to the point where the first speaker, President of Brazil, Lula, addressed it almost right away. So when we talk about global governance, we're talking about the United Nations Security Council, where decisions that affect the entire planet are made. And in particular, you find that almost 60% of the resolutions in the United Nations Security Council have to do with Africa. Yet, only 5 countries, essentially the victors, that emerged at the end of the Second World War have permanent seats with veto power. Now, this is a 20th century structure being utilized to govern the 21st century, because, of course, the United Nations is the primary global governing body. So we want to see that body democratized. We want to see more representation. This is something that President Tinubu has been advocating for, and this is something that Vice President Kashim Shettima, who led the delegation, echoed, and it is gaining a lot of steam. The United States has also lent its voice to the need for reforming the United Nations Security Council. This is a major achievement. The second issue, of course, is the reform of the global financial architecture. It is, again, not in sync. It does not favor the global south. The issue of risk, whenever projects are to be funded, investment, trade, favors, all of that favors the global north. We want to see that also reformed. So but there's several other issues that were discussed: migration, counterterrorism, nuclear disarmament, conflict prevention, peacekeeping, where Africa is seeking to establish an African standby force where funding is required, because we're also members of the United Nations, and we contribute funds to the United Nations for peacekeeping. And so it's almost like a piggy bank when there's conflict all over the world, because all the countries, the 193 countries that are members of the United Nations, contribute funds, and such funds are allocated for peacekeeping so that it relieves some of the pressure from the countries that within the conflict area. So there was this resolution that established 70% funding that would come from the United Nations, and then African countries have to come up, the African Union has to come up with 30%. It's something that we are not in favor of. And, these are some of the issues that were discussed there. Of course, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, that are clearly not likely to be met. Nigeria is calling for an extension and finding better ways of funding them, which has to do with the restructuring of the global financial architecture. Nigeria, you see, part of the problem we have also is that our reputation out there in the world and in the United Nations is far bigger than our own perception of ourselves. Nigeria is highly reckoned with on the global stage, highly reckoned with within the United Nations. It sponsors a lot of resolutions and initiatives, and it is one of the key clogs in terms of coalition building to support initiatives. So Nigeria was the sponsor of, along with the African group, of the United Nations resolution on tax reform, which we want to see turned into a UN framework convention on tax reform, so that huge multinationals would stop cheating on taxes. Developing countries would gain more from such taxes that accrue. There's something referred to as the transfer price system that a lot of multinationals use to evade tax, where they move funds within their own organization from one company to the other, and frame it as if there's movement of funds from two or more separate entities, whereas it's just in-house. So these are the sort of things that are looked at the global stage, and solutions are preferred, and Nigeria is leading. Debt is another issue, because the debt crisis that a lot of African countries are facing, and the increasing debt of several others, because there's a global downturn of of economies, of economic activity. It's something that needs to be addressed holistically. And climate change. Before we left for UNGA, half of the city of Maiduguri was submerged in water, you're aware. So the effects of climate change are real. You know, it's something that the world needs to do something about. And Nigeria is a key player. It has a huge voice in terms of representing the global south, being the largest country in Africa in terms of population and size of economy. Digital diplomacy, I've already mentioned migration and so forth. Let me stop here.
All right. So, Minister, I see that from, I studied and I looked at the President Bola Tinubu's speech at the 78th, his address to the General Assembly, the 78th session. And now you look at the speech of the Vice President. There are almost a repeat and a copy and paste proposals from those two speeches of Nigeria's presentation to the UN General Assembly. For example, debt forgiveness. It was one of the things that President Bola Tinubu canvassed for.
Yeah, but it's not copy and paste.
No, I mean, not in that sense. I'm not saying it literally word for word, but I know that over the years, several governments in this country had canvassed for similar things. They are gone for asking for a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. They've asked for regional peace within the African sub-region or West Africa or on the continent. Illicit financial flows and how the wealthiest nations can help to ensure that those who are reaping the nations of Africa off are not benefiting outside of the continent. These are some of the issues. But the question will be, which of these have as Nigeria be able to benefit from? Debt forgiveness, did we benefit from it? Do we have it? We
benefited from debt forgiveness.
Permanent seats on the Security Council, do we have it?
Under President Obasanjo, we benefited from debt forgiveness. Have you forgotten?
No, I'm saying from President Tinubu from last year, and now we're talking about this year's benefit. So are any of our proposals been listened to? Has anything been granted?
It's a process. It's not an event. It's not just an event. It's a process. It takes time. But you have to be there. You have to be present. And then these things happen. They don't happen overnight. We're talking about the entire planet taking a decision, and then it cascades down, and then you start feeling the the effect. So the effect that you felt when the last time we had debt forgiveness did not just happen with one UNGA. That's just it. And if you're talking about even health, global health, pandemics, and all of that, and the fact that we are now talking about producing our own vaccines after what had happened during the COVID pandemic, these are things that have palpable results that you can see, but don't expect that as soon as UNGA wraps up, that's it. The entire debt of the global south.
But we asked for it last year. That's the point I'm making. That some of these proposals are repetitive, do we have a progress? Do we have it?
Even in my submission, I alluded to the progress that has been made. Last year, when President Tinubu talked about the reform of the United Nations Security Council, he was one of few voices that was to lead on that. This year, the very opening, President Lula talked about it. Before UNGA even started, a few days before the UNGA convened, Linda Thomas Greenfield, the permanent representative of the United Nations, said they are in support of African countries getting 2 seats in the United Nations Security Council. The US was not talking about anybody getting additional seats the year before. So you can see that there's been a shift in their position. And it is the pressure that countries such as Nigeria put on the global stage and bilaterally on these countries that makes them shift. So we are getting results.
So, I mean, there are those who fear, Minister, that if those, for example, the proposition for a permanent seat at the Security Council, there are 15 nations, 5 permanent and 5 non-permanent. The question will be, will Nigeria be in the cut? Will Nigeria get a seat there, considering what has become a diminishing presence or influence of Nigeria, or even on the African continent, economy-wise, or even politically? There are those who will say our non-alignment policy and our foreign policy is giving us a disadvantage in global politics. Are we rethinking this our stance?
How is it giving us a disadvantage?
Minister, for example, let me give an example, Minister.
That is why when I made that, when I was making my submission at the very beginning, I said there's a huge disconnect. There's a disconnect between the perception out there of Nigeria, the reputation that Nigeria has, and our own in-country perception of ourselves. We don't know how much other countries value Nigeria's positions, value Nigeria's participation, how much of a huge reputation we have out there as a leading country, not only in Africa, but in the global South. And of course, if you look at the African continent, Nigeria is the only country in Africa that has more or less a permanent seat in the equivalent of the United Nations Security Council within the African Union, which is referred to as the Peace and Security Council. It's the only country on the continent, not South Africa, not Egypt, not any of these countries. Nigeria is the only one. There's a reason for that, because
so Minister, this is the point.
Leadership. If you look at ECOWAS, even ECOWAS, whenever there is a crisis, look at the list of number of countries that have led ECOWAS, number of heads of state. You will find that Nigeria leads in times of crisis. This seat is supposed to be rotated, but others repose a lot of confidence in our leadership, in our fairness, in our decision making, and they give us this leadership. They ask us to lead whenever there is crisis.
So, I mean, Minister,
so internally we're talking about a lack of foreign policy. For crying out loud, read the Constitution and see what's in there. Our foreign policy objectives are enshrined in the Constitution. So people that say that we don't have a foreign policy or we don't have foreign policy objectives, need to really go back to the Constitution.
But Minister, sorry, apologies. Yeah, apologies, Minister. For those who look at the foreign policy, and strictly, if you look at it, majorly, the headline of our foreign policy talks about the promotion and protection of Nigeria's national interest. And
that's
if you look,
first objective.
Yes,
objective.
That's why I said the headline. Absolutely, the headline of it.
So tell me which country leads without saying that they want to protect their national interest? There's no country that begins with listing its foreign policy objectives without mentioning its national interest.
So, Minister,
that's number one.
In terms of influence and economic power, these are how countries of the world are being rated.
Yes.
You look at the wealthiest countries of the world, they're rated by their economic powers or their military powers. And you look at Nigeria, Nigeria is rated maybe number 4 in terms of GDP on the continent. There is a dwindling on our influence.
No, that's not
Minister,
right. That's not right.
What data do you have, sir?
The largest economy, number 1 in GDP.
What data do you have? As of what year, Minister?
Continent. Huh?
What data do you have? As of what year, Minister?
What data do you have?
I've just told you that Nigeria ranks below South Africa, Egypt,
the National
Rwanda.
National Bureau of Statistics is in the process of rebasing our economy. Look at the size of our informal sector. That is not being measured, that is not being included in the measure of GDP. So let's not talk about
No, no. So, Minister, the question here is not about, as you are speaking, as a foreign minister, and you, I'm talking to you. We can't measure who loves Nigeria more than any other person. This is our country. We love it. And when we are having this conversation, I think it's in the best interest of our nation. But the question...
Is the self-flagellation that I want us...
but the question is sometimes we need to speak,
while you and I
we need to have the truth to be able to get the right perspective for us to move forward.
While we're discussing facts, let's put aside the self-flagellation. Okay,
no, I'm putting facts, and I've given you what I have. Maybe it's different from what you have as a government official.
We don't have to keep beating ourselves down when the world looks at us differently. I'm not saying that we should not have constructive criticism, but to keep on self-flagellating to the point of destroying the country is not something that really should be condoned. We need to.
I think when we are having some kind of academic and this kind of good conversation around the progress of our country, those ones that look sore, that are not really looking good for us to have a better conversation, doesn't mean that we are bringing down our country.
I'm not saying to you everything is hunky-dory.
Minister,
we have challenges,
the question,
but so does the rest of the world.
So that we don't lose the focus of my question.
Are you aware that there has been a global economic downturn? Are you aware that Europe is going through an energy crisis? We're not the only ones.
Minister, don't let us lose the focus of the conversation and the question I'm about to ask. And my question is that when we're talking about global influence, countries of the world are actually working to improve, and they're rated by their economic and sometimes by their military powers. The question is, for example, the BRICS nation, there are those who are suggesting that maybe an alignment to that bloc may give us an edge. What do you think, and what is the stance of the Bola Tinubu government in that regard?
The Bola Ahmed Tinubu administration outlined its foreign policy agenda from the very beginning. And it is centered on strategic autonomy. It's something that has served us, well. We were non-aligned during the Cold War, when the world was structured along a bilateral axis, bipolar axis. The United States and the Western countries on one side, the Soviet Union and its bloc on the other side. Okay, we chose to be non-aligned. We got along with both sides, and we did well, along with the likes of India and several other countries that were non-aligned. And they're taking the same position now. If you look at the advantage that India has gained from that, the fact that it gets along with the United States, it gets along with China, it is part of the BRICS, where both countries, where India and China are members, and it's equally a member of the G20. Incidentally, so is China. It's a member of both. So this is what we are looking to do as well. There's nothing that says that we must align with one side against another.
So it's not on the agenda of this government to join BRICS, for example?
Why not?
Are we proposing it officially?
When the time is right. We've never said that we're not joining BRICS.
But are we officially proposing to BRICS nations?
It's about timing. We have to time ourselves and indicate. We've already indicated our interest in joining, but we have not formally written, and we will do so at the right time when it is going to be the most advantageous for us to do so. But we need to. There are a lot of reforms that are even going on internally for us to even make that move. So it's a matter of timing. It doesn't mean that we went to China. President Tinubu was in China, don't forget, recently. Vice President Kashim Shettima also visited China before that. And in all these engagements, we have made clear that we are interested in joining BRICS at the right time.
So, Minister, so if debt forgiveness is part of our agenda as a nation, just like the Obasanjo government was very successful, so I look at the nations that Nigeria is owing, 5 of them, which makes up approximately 593, almost 600 million US dollars that Nigeria has gotten in loan. China is leading the pack with about $4 billion that we are owing that country. Are we talking to China for some kind of debt forgiveness if we went to the global stage for debt forgiveness?
That is not what we're discussing with China. And when it comes to the issue of debt, look at the debt to GDP ratio even of Nigeria. So we're not even amongst the critically indebted nations when they talk about debt. When we talk about debt of developing countries, Nigeria is not in that sort of a precarious situation. In fact, as a matter of fact, China is prepared to lend more. China is prepared to invest more in Nigeria in terms of infrastructure development and other things. So that is not, but you see, what you're failing to take into consideration is when we talk about debt forgiveness, we're not necessarily referring to ourselves. Nigeria is considered to be a leading nation, not just on the African continent, but in the global south. So when we speak on behalf of Africa, we speak on behalf of developing nations, we speak on behalf of the global south. And we speak as the largest Black nation on the planet. So that you have to bear that in mind.
Absolutely. I never forget that because, I mean, a lot of the times on the international stage, when we're having conversations, I'm not sure there is a finer country than our nation. But our challenges and the way and manner we approach them over the years, leadership has been a major problem for us to overcoming our challenge. And that's why it is important for us to put our situation in perspective. Yes, we're a big nation, but millions and millions of our people are in abject poverty. So when we are on a global stage, there are conversations that will benefit the Nigerian people, and which is one thing that, that bothers the mind right now. And I'd like to know, what would you say are the direct benefits, immediate low-hanging fruits that this contingent that went to the 79th UN General Assembly meeting have come back with?
Funding of the Sustainable Development Goals, extending it. Don't forget that the Sustainable Development Goals is addressing all of these issues. And just like you rightly pointed out, a substantial number of the poor on the planet are in Nigeria. So when we talk about tackling poverty, when we talk about tackling food insecurity, when we talk about improving inclusivity, funding of infrastructure development, and so on and so forth, which is what essentially what the health challenges, it's what the SDGs are about. And that's what we're speaking to. We're saying, extend the SDGs, find ways of funding it better, find ways of reforming the global tax convention. And that way, we get better funding, we improve, we ameliorate the situation of millions of Nigerians. But it doesn't mean that we will just go out there and just say, Nigeria, Nigeria, Nigeria. No, we have to speak also equally on behalf of others that are looking to us for leadership. And with that responsibility comes them acquiescing to our leadership, them acquiescing to more and more Nigerians in leading positions on the global stage.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. It's a difficult one, protecting the interests of the nation on a global stage. You've got your job cut out for you. You're an ambassador, and you've got, you know this. Sometimes we on the ground, those of you who are thinking more internationally, those of us who think more locally about our people, we might be a bit more emotional about how this affects the bottom line. That's the average person. Well, thank you so much indeed, Honorable Minister, for your time tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.